Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they did. They absolutely got it right. And as we continue to see it proven out in our everyday present history, I'm not surprised at anything, nor should you be. Especially those that listen to this program and those that are on either Liberty Works Radio Network or Dr. Mike Spalding on Soaring Eagle and all of the different other programming that is out there from a very informed Christian point of view. There should be no surprises. Today's program, I'm going to go down the route of how is a house built, or more so, how is this house built, and what is various components of it. It all really came to a head for me once again when I was asked a question this week, as I've been asked ever since the election. Hey, Tom, did you ever expect to see this in your lifetime? Or the question would be, hey, Tom, did you see this coming? Or something to the effect, Tom, what just happened? Why are we, in the situation we're in? And did you see this? I'm smiling over as Kath is kind of looking at me going, the answer's simple. Yeah, saw this coming. Yeah, expected it to happen someday. Yeah, where have you been for the last, 70 plus years? That's the real question. Where have people been as citizens for the last 80 years, 100 years, 150 years? Where have we been? So as a side note, I sat with a friend of mine the other day and we were talking about constitutional classes and, this one that puts them on, that one that puts them on, and, who teaches well. And I got a little frustrated in that partly. And you've seen before when I had my bookcase behind in previous programming that I have the 5 volumes of the Founders Constitution. I'll probably pull one out just so you see that it's a small book and series of books, 5 books in the volume with very small print. And I said, here's the information. Here's the truth. Here's all the good stuff about the foundation and how our Constitution should operate, with both information from the Federalist, which a lot of people read, and the Anti-Federalist, and other supporting letters and documents. Oh, yeah. And, we could go ahead and beat that dead horse over the end of the cavern there, and that dead horse called American education, what's happened with it. We can go through all of those types of discussions, efforts, gyrations that I continuously have spoken of for many years, that, if you really want to do something to bring about the solid vote, you had to go back and take the educational system away from those who now control it. That's in every place, every city, every state, in the federal government, all of that. It's cold in Ohio. I hope that you're enjoying your coffee. So all of those that can't see, as I take a sip of my coffee, think about that. Why have people, or think about this, why have people not looked at their educational system seriously? Man, that's good coffee. So let's take a step back in history. We're going to go back, not all the way to the founding of the nation, we're going to go back a few years after the founding, and you're going to do the math. Here's a education question for you. So go ahead and go to what was it? When did the Constitution go into effect? I'll help you. Went through the convention in 1787, went into effect in 1789. Well, there was something that happened between, and I've talked to you about this before. You'll see in the promo and then on the website at where? Right up here, samueladamsreturns.net, that you will see that I have these references here for you, and that what you will also see is that this individual by the name of Arthur Stansbury, he looked around and he said, something's not right. Something is not right. And therefore, he took and said, well, what do I do about it? The educational system's really messed up. Arthur Stansbury is looking around and going, nobody understands how government is supposed to work. Nobody understands that our Constitution is not that hard to understand and act upon. Arthur Stansbury then said, well, I need to do something. And he did. He came up with over 332 questions with basic answers for every citizen, but he didn't write it for every citizen. He wrote it for and at the level of none other than, what do you call them? The little one? Elementary students. So this is written for elementary students, and so that means that even you could understand it, and I can understand it and answer the questions, or should be able to. Anyway, so here's the math. In 1789 was when the Constitution went into effect. By 1828, Stansbury publishes a catechism on the United States Constitution because nobody understood what was going on, and it really wasn't being taught, and it wasn't being implemented to the extent that our founders, when he started reading the Constitution and some founding documents, went, uh-oh, we are in trouble. So here you have, there's your math question. You take and you put on the top is 1828, then right under it with a minus sign in front, that's a dash, for those that, as some people would say, live in places where they don't teach that. And if you really look at your keyboard, it's kind of like there next to the 0 on a keyboard, on the numeric portion of the top of a keyboard. So anyway, this was, again, it's 1828. Underneath that, you put that dash or the minus sign, and you put in 1789. Then you draw a line underneath that, and then you do the math. How many years was that between the implementation, the agreement of the states to formalize a form of republic, a government, a national institution, and somebody stands up and goes, whoa, nobody understands it. Nobody has a clue what's going on. Let's see, what type of question? Let's see, here's some questions. Has Congress any farther powers? So, he's going through all these powers on Congress. What is meant by establishing these? And that would be like the post office and various things like that. Powers given to Congress. What power is given to Congress by the Constitution? Simple question. What do you mean by these different terms? What is a tax? Kath gave me 5 minutes. What are duties? What are imposts? What are excises? holy smokes, you're getting a lesson in economics at the same time that you're trying to understand, what the Constitution is all about. Well, I did mention to my friend that as I come up with some spare time here in the near future, which I will have some for the rest of this month, that at one point I was looking at, again, putting a forward on this, but these questions, this catechism, as you go to samueladamsreturns.net, you can download the free PDF on these questions. Take and go through it yourself, and then why don't you take and go through it with your adult children, then your grandchildren, or go through it with your children, and I guarantee you will have more insight and knowledge than the majority of the people sitting in Congress and all of the bureaucrats throughout all of Washington, D.C. and its distributed tentacles, and even those politicians within your state, and quite frankly, some judges. And lawyers, a lot of lawyers don't understand the Constitution. They only understand the nonsense they're taught at what do they call those schools? I think that anyway, they're not even, law schools. So with that also, I made a comment to this friend when we were living in Washington State. I started doing a catechism for Washington State of the same method, means of questions and all of that. I did say that I would entertain and begin going through where we live now in the state of Ohio, and I would be going through the Ohio Constitution such that I'd start putting something together to ask the various questions. State constitutions are definitely more difficult because of their construct and all of the junk, like in Ohio, that was amended into the Constitution that doesn't make the Constitution a simple governing document. But the way the Ohio Constitution was written, for instance, we shouldn't have all that amended junk in there in the first place, because it absolutely, in my opinion, from a founding perspective, has allowed us and even the likes of our governor to become the little dictators that we're seeing all over this nation. How's your house built? Well, what we're going to get into in the next couple of segments as well is again, going back to the questions that I've been asked. Tom, did you see this coming? Tom, did you ever think this would happen in your lifetime? Well, all I can say in general is to go review all the programs, and the answer is without question, yes. The Anti-Federalists predicted where we would be if we did not have what? If we did not have a moral and virtuous people. So we are going to look at two different things within the context of these last two segments. One is we will come back and look at none other than a book that I put up before called Philip Dru, that's D-R-U, Administrator. That was written and finally admitted by Edward Mandell House. The references are there on the website for you to go find more on what I did on some of the programs, as well as a free download on Philip Dru, Administrator. And again, we'll talk about it in the next segment a little bit more in more detail. The version that I have up there for you to download is one that I highly recommend, because the foreword from 1998 I thought was exceptionally well done. There's also another link that if you don't want to understand these analysis of this book, that you can just go ahead and download the book. But the bottom line is that there's a great little outline that brings into culmination those that want power, almost like a blueprint. Some people call it a blueprint. Others say, oh, that, a bunch of nonsense. But the fact and reality is that we're living not 1984, but Philip Dru. So come on back in the next segment because Samuel Adams, he got it right, and so did the Anti-Federalist. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists, they did. They absolutely got it right. And, Liberty Works Radio Network has been fabulous to me, and what the programming has been. We're on those 3 different time slots. And I'll tell you what, now more than ever, everybody's out there screaming for money. Money, 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 you know. Every email you get, I don't know, I'm probably trashing 100 emails a day with tidbits and teasers and all these things, and then, send us your money because we got to have it. We got to do that. But anyway, you get it. Liberty Works Radio Network doesn't really do that. If you are signed up for their newsletter, they're giving you some scheduling content within what's going to happen during the week. You get the flashes, of, hey, here's the programming, live programming, what's going on. Not so much, obviously, with the weekend programming where I am. But the fact of the matter is that they've been fighting for liberty for decades, and it's a real good mix. So with that real good mix, I highly recommend, once again, and will always and continue, to find that donate button. And let's keep Liberty Works Radio Network fighting for liberty and as a network that gives you an alternative source to all the other insanities that are out there. Hey, these guys never have gone big because they believe in truth to the core. So, you really want truth, you could chase it wherever you would like to, but I would highly suggest you look at the content here at Liberty Works Radio Network. So let's get back to, how do you build your house? How's the house built? How is it constructed? Is there a blueprint? Are there those types of things that just make it into either that Hearst Castle, that Neuschwanstein, that was never really lived in by Mad Ludwig, or is it that shack in the back? I don't know. What's it? What is it? Your house? Well, the house that I'm talking about here in respect to Philip Dru, D-R-U, administrator, is a book that was written by a gentleman, which the references are there at samueladamsreturns.net. And it's a guy that had too much money, another spoiled brat, if you will, that had way too much money and ended up with way too much influence and became a socialist. Isn't it always amazing to you? I know it always amazes me, but, Scripture talks about it, that money corrupts, not money itself, but the lust of power and the lust of those things that money or mechanisms of power have over people and what that does. Even with envy, that's another biggie. The things that happen with that are a driving force. And so when someone has more than anybody else, it always is amazing to me that they would be a socialist. Well, that is exactly who not a real colonel, but a guy that claimed to be a colonel was. His name was none other than the notorious Edward Mandell House. Edward Mandell House grew up in Texas, wealthy family. You can look up all the details. I don't want to get into those here. I got tons of references for you. He was the alter ego of Woodrow Wilson. And there's a lot of history that talks about here. He was so influential at the beginning of the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, is that in some articles that are out there, it is actually, the name is given Edward Mandell Woodrow Wilson as one name and taking out his last name, because everything that Woodrow Wilson ended up doing was in so many ways clearly laid out by Mr. House. And Mr. House was the one that in his papers, and I didn't read all his papers because there's a lot to read there, but in some of the tidbits that I was able to draw from and resources, when he was asked on how did he get Woodrow Wilson's attention, he just said he gave him $35,000. Now you have to understand $35,000 in somewhere around 1911, 1910, 1911 is like $800,000 in, $1 million in today's money. So in other words, he bought Woodrow Wilson. He found that Woodrow Wilson's mindset was so much like his that he was able to do the old Vulcan mind meld and actually get Wilson to execute on the various things that he was intent on. A lot of that was he was the father and the help and the primary designer for the Federal Reserve. He was the one that put together the League of Nations. He actually took and negotiated the treaty, the armistice with after World War I with the Germans. This guy had amazing, amazing influence, and he just was really, 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 really one rich dude. But prior to taking and getting involved with Wilson, he wrote this little book. The book, let me see here, a little growl for you. The version that I have up there for you that I'm highly recommending you read with the forward is about 177 pages. The actual book itself is, less than that, 150, 160 pages. I'm sure you can get through this story. What is amazing in this book is you have this military guy who goes to, the academy and comes out of there, graduates, and next thing you know, he is taking and developing a whole mechanism on how to fundamentally change America, how that the Constitution is meaningless. We need to have an administrative, bureaucratic means and methodology of doing things. So what House was able to build along the way is he developed a policy group, and he worked with the likes of Vanderlip, J.P. Morgan, Paul Warburg. He was the designer and one of the founders of what has now become the Council on Foreign Relationships. Relationships? No, the Council on Foreign Relations. So under the CFR and what they've done, it is designing the mechanisms of a industrialized oligarchy that rules the United States under a different definition of constitutionalism, giving all power to consensus form of government. In essence, it is a form of Marxism. So you have to understand that. And House was definitely a socialist. And he looked at it from more of a Fabian perspective instead of let's just slowly, because he tried with some things, especially during the Wilson administration, to make a direct attack within the changing the government. Oh, and don't forget, yes, House was a counselor, an influencer within the FDR administration. So a lot of what FDR put into place, House was a key designer of. So he actually looks, House, here's something that I found, House cheerfully, and it's in this, the forward to what I've suggested that you read, and here's why. It says that House cheerfully acknowledged that fact in an essay he wrote for Liberty magazine shortly after the election of FDR, and here's a quote. In 1911, I wrote a book entitled Philip Dru, Administrator. It came in for considerable discussion, favorable and unfavorable. It was, in fact, a semi-political novel showing how a dictator seized the government of the United States and anticipated Mussolini by a number of years. End quote. So this was in talking about right after FDR, talking about Mussolini, and the question is posed, was House, in fact, Mussolini before Mussolini came on scene? And then going through what House proposes inside of Philip Dru Administrator, the idea of the darlings of both corporate and intellectual elites coming together, and that even the leaders of America's mainline religious denominations were singing the praises of fascism in 1935. Dr. John C. Bennett, president of the Union Theological Seminary, praised fascism for its constructive value in a stage of the development of a new economic order, 1935. So you can read the rest of that intro on Philip Dru there at samueladamsreturns.net, where I have this PDF link there posted for you. It was in the promo as well. But, it gives you the opportunity to go through, get a synopsis of this, and understanding that what Philip Dru started in 1911, and then putting into play what Woodrow Wilson was very, very clearly outlined in this short read of Philip Dru, Administrator. Also, you'll see that I do have links to what I've talked about in the past here at samueladamsreturns.net, because those anti-federalists always have gotten it right. And what we're going to talk about as we move into the last segment will be that, again, that tie point as to how did this happen? How did we get to where we are in our present day and age? And, I hammer on a lot of the church leaders out there, and there's a lot of things going. I mean, what we have, and there's a link on the site to the enemies within the church, and very specifically to something that happened down in Naples, Florida, with one of the largest Baptist denominational churches from the Southern Conference in the U.S., and how these evil and insanities of social justice and wokeness and all these other things have been in and a part of, and even more so, embraced within the Southern Baptist Convention, as well as across America and a lot of the major denominations. I am going to take you back to a root book again, because Sam Adams was, the whole program is about those mirrors in history. We can go all the way back to, the 1700s. We could go back to the 1600s. We could go back into history. And I always can bring relevance to our present in respect to that. But some people, at times, it becomes a little bit more difficult to grasp those things that were happening in those principles. Even with near history of 1911, that was only 100 years ago. History of 1935, history of just 10 years ago, history of 20 years ago, and bringing that relevant. Well, we'll do that in the next segment, because it is critical that we look at some of the writings of very instrumental components, again, of the church and what's happened here, because it comes down to where are the moral and virtuous leaders? Where are those that would stand up? Maybe we don't have a lot of perceived morality in Donald Trump, but he sure had the virtue to take and be an American and answer a lot of the questions on the Catechism of the U.S. Constitution. So come on back. Anti-Federalists got it right, and we're going to dig in some more on house being built. Ladies and gentlemen, and all of you screaming eagles, welcome back again to Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. Yes, they did. They got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. I keep forgetting whether I introduced myself even in the first segment. But hey, welcome back, everybody. Welcome down there in Lima, Ohio, and anywhere else that you may be listening. I greatly appreciate that you're here and joining me on the program. It's just so much to cover. Kath was asking me during the break a little bit here. She says, how could anyone want fascism? What is it? Is it just because they're power mongers? I don't get it. Well, it goes to, as we saw that House wrote, and as it is there in Philip Dru, as it is in what we have today, is the techno-oligarchs are the ones that in the natural world are in control. So when you have the Bill Gates, you have the face schmucks books, doodles and woodles and Twitters and ditters and all of the other millionaires, billionaires, and so on and so forth that now control and are tied in to the various bureaucracies within the federal government. It's perfect. Read the book. Read the little book called Philip Dru. 1984, that and Animal House and all of that is all about communism and communications and censorship and all of that stuff. Go to 1911, which 1911s, those are pretty darn good little things to have that squirt big solid chunks of it. Okay, I digress there. Anyway, yes, 1911s, there was something good that came out of 1911. Very, very effective tool, let's put it that way. But the point is, and as Kath and I were talking again during the break, is that when you have big business that doesn't think about people's liberty, and they have no morality, they have no virtue, they have no consideration for their employees, the stock market only wants to get bigger and bigger and continue to take and not follow the biblical principles of when somebody works, you should pay them a fair wage. You should not take and work your donkey or your workers in excess. A lot of principles for business in Scripture. Well, wait a minute. The SBC, other major denominations, wait a minute. Don't get involved in culture. No. Don't get involved in politics. No. I mean, let's not get involved in these social issues. That's for government. But you know what? We're going to praise the fact that fascism in 1935 was really driving towards a new economic order. We're looking at the idea of the social gospel in 1880. Oh, here's a place we can start. Here's a place we can start with the next segment, as I was mentioning here, is that, we can fill, let me finish with this. Let me finish with this quote from the Wall Street Journal. In 1937 was Thomas Phelps, and he was the Washington bureau chief at that time. And this is very remarkable. And again, it's in the little front end there, forward on Philip Dru, that I put up on the website for you. It's called, quote, "As Congress puts the finishing touches on the legislative program for the first 4 years of the Roosevelt administration, Colonel E.M. House, he's a confidant, let me pronounce it correct, confidant of President Roosevelt, emerges as a prophet, if not the real brain trust of the New Deal. Almost 25 years ago, House wrote of a revolution led by a young West Pointer who triumphed in one brief but bloody battle, became a benevolent dictator, and proceeded to reshape the American government. In its large outlines, almost the entire revolutionary program has been put through or is in process of being realized under two Democratic presidents who have served since House turned novelist for a few weeks. End quote. Those two being none other than Woodrow Wilson and FDR. So, we can go back. That's recent history. As I was mentioning, we go through in that history either back to the early times of our founders, or here it is, 1937 is when you have everything you need in place to take us through to where we are today. But everybody thought that was wonderful. So I am also, you'll see in there the links to things that I've spoken about. So it's our recent history here at SamuelAdamsReturns.net. And that recent history takes us to none other than the Unholy Alliance. I thought this was a great read. And if we're looking at the parallels as to why we do not have the moral and virtuous leadership that now everybody out there in some congregations are crying for. What happened, Tom? I get this all the time. Tom, what happened? Why don't we have anybody for president? Why don't we have anybody for governor? Why don't we have anybody for why don't we have anybody? Well, come on. Go back and pay attention in the last 5 years of being on this program. Go back over the last 25 years of having a conversation with me along the road. Go back to that last 25 years sitting down at a table with Kath and I and around with other people. Conversation was what's happening in your church. So what we see here in now people recently putting together the enemies within the church, the Unholy Alliance was done back in the 70s, was well written back then. I guess there's some kind of new rewrite out there. A friend of mine was talking about a book that is out there, but what Greg Bashan wrote back at that time, I think was very interesting. So let's cover a couple of things. The socialism and communism, inherent in abolitionism, gained a new footing in America in the mid-1880s, therefore coming about with the social gospel, a panacea for all of social ills. Transcendentalism came about in America as well, and it reached across. It had a profound impact on social, economic, and political aspects. We look at socialism as we talked about in the last two segments, and as we made that quote from the Wall Street Journal in 1937 with E.M. House and all of that. What we're seeing is that socialism, that impact, it came into America. Remember that Marxism came full force when? 1848. Socialism been dabbling along, all of that good stuff, but bam, you just get that right hook in there. A big shift in Unitarian theology, and this was back in 1865. The theological currents shifted. You had German idealism of Immanuel Kant and G.W.F. Hegel. And that then reached in and started making those differences. You remember when Unitarianism, and we talked about that back in the 1700s, right there next to Harvard, and then influenced Harvard, influenced many other things. I was going to talk about Governor Belcher and the Belcher Society, and I only have 5 minutes left to talk about anything, but there was already a destruction that was happening in America with Unitarianism walking away from a miraculous Savior and God. But this is worse in 1865 when the thought moved from even deism in the Unitarian theology to pantheism, that of many gods. So you see the Unitarians run around with that weird symbol. What does that say? Exo something on the back of their bumper stickers and that. That's the Unitarians in many ways are pantheists. They believe in a lot of stuff. And those Unitarian leaders, you had Ralph Waldo Emerson and others. You got into transcendentalism, as we talked about, and on and on and on it goes in denying the salvation that's in Jesus Christ. And it influenced everything within our society. So when you're looking at when E.M. House came on the scene in the late 1800s, the influences that he had, and go look at, I know people don't always go look at all the references, but I put them there so that you don't think that I'm just, a conspiratorial type of guy putting all this stuff up. In fact, I saw a lot of things on House that I've rejected because of the way that they were on either single issue people or people that were making some writings that I thought did not get to the heart of the matter, that how is the house built? The house that's built right now has been in so many ways a house of cards because it wasn't built on the morality and the virtue that our founders expected the churches to keep developing the leaders that would be able to execute the Constitution in a moral manner. Instead, we ended up with all of these other various, I would call ungodly, unholy theologies that we're seeing even in modern churches today that are embracing all of the Black Lives Matter, the woke stuff, all of that. The only woke that was really meaningful was that of the Great Awakening during the founding of this nation. And that Great Awakening was bringing people back to the fundamentals of we are sinners and only the God of the Bible is the God and sovereign of the universe, and Jesus sits on the throne and he has been given all dominion over everything. Wow. I'm not preaching a sermon. I'm just telling you the reality of what our founders believed. And as we were going through and putting together our state constitutions in the 13 colonies, and then even the undergirding of the federal constitution, especially from that anti-federalist perspective, because the anti-federalists, as I say, I'm going to leave you kind of with this one, is once again, the Federalists expected the churches to do their job, pastors to do their job, so that we would always have moral and virtuous leaders. Anti-Federalists said, no, we're sinners. We need to have those other protections in that federal document. In fact, that federal document was terrible, and based on the Anti-Federalists, it gets us to today. It gets us to our present condition, because churches have not maintained that development. They walked away from, they rejected the idea of developing moral and religious leaders that would be in society, would be in government, would be in education, would be in all of those things. And over the last 100 years, and even more so in the present, they have given it over to the enemies of God, period. So within this last few minutes, I would challenge you to get a hold and download not only the Philip Dru, the administrator, but the Catechism on the United States Constitution. Go through that catechism and see, how much of it you can answer, how much of it you would know, And then again, take it to your children, to your grandchildren, to your great-grandchildren, and see if there's not something that we can prepare for, as we will have to really work hard to maintain our liberties and our republic under God. Amen.